Hey everyone, welcome back. This is At the Kitchen Table Podcast, episode number 7. And today I'm joined by Liz Russell, co-founder of Optimistic Labs. Words are hard sometimes. Liz is the co-founder of Optimistic Labs, a consulting firm that helps organizations build communities that make their brand stronger, their growth stickier, and their strategy more human. Liz brings more than 14 years of experience building high-performing teams and scalable systems across SaaS, GovTech, and consulting. She's worked as a VP of customer success, a director of product, and worked with several different companies that ended up helping citizens and their flood insurance members get critical calls during disaster recovery. Liz, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Absolutely. So, you and I kind of come from the same cloth, come from the same pathways. And, always the point of At the Kitchen Table is to kind of pull up a chair and have a conversation about just about everything. But today, we're talking about not only your work that you're doing now, but the pathways that you've come down as far as public safety and emergency management. Can you talk a little bit about, that background and how it got to where you are today?
Yeah, I would love to. And I'm going to take you very, very briefly back to middle school, which is not normally where I start with
Right.
a professional background. But I was in middle school when 9/11 happened. Then I was in high school when Hurricane Katrina happened. And so by the time I was getting into college, there had started to be a lot more infrastructure and institutions that were focused on emergency management, which means when I got into college, there was actually emergency management programs, and I ended up doing my master's in management with a focus on disaster recovery, which is somewhat rare, as you know, in this industry. And so coming out of school, I had this wonderful experience, and I also had this sort of serendipitous opportunity where literally like the September that I finished school, Hurricane Irene hit and Tropical Storm Lee hit, both impacted New York. And so I was both in the right place and at the right time, especially in the middle of a recession. We were in the middle of the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. So there were no jobs except for these jobs. And so I had this great opportunity to get right into disaster recovery, did that for a few years, and then I had this opportunity to work on a project where we decided to build out a custom piece of software for one of our customers who was a subcontractor to FEMA. And through that, I got pulled into the tech world. I started doing, I ended up essentially being tasked with understanding the full kind of use case, understanding what customers needed, et cetera, to build out that product, work my way into being the director of product there. And, we love the platform so much, we ended up spinning it out into a multi-tenant system that we could actually sell in a SaaS format, really building out our first SaaS company as a consulting firm. And so that's what got me the tech bug. And I stayed with tech companies for a while, in different areas, as you mentioned, product and customer success. And then most recently made the switch, came out and decided to go into the consulting world and focus on community building.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting how those building blocks get laid out, right? And you these certain disasters happen, you get the interest, and then you build on that. And I remember those times. I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember those times distinctly. And even during that time, because I went back to college as an adult learner in 2008 with the idea of getting my bachelor's in emergency management.
Amazing.
Ultimately, because of my background in fire and from the fire service, I ended up getting the bachelor's in fire service administration just because it was an easier pathway and direction from my mentor and so on. But always had that interest, and especially, you look at the time period between 2000 and 2010 and the ramp up of FEMA, from the tragedies of 9/11 all the way through hurricanes and natural disasters, and that whole ramp up and all of the people that they brought on. And then you introduce TSA and all of that stuff. And then figuring out where the technology fits in all of that, and how it's grown since then, of managing disasters, managing communities, and so on. Did you end up When I saw your background in customer success, I was a customer success manager for a couple of years,
Oh,
and
nice.
love that work. And it was for next generation 911 SaaS companies.
Amazing.
And so, but I fell into that because of a small skill set that I developed in sales, which led to doing some customer retention work, which led to doing customer success. Did you have to develop certain skill set outside of your education to prepare yourself to those roles and ultimately where you are now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I experienced in my very early career in the emergency management world is that emergency management is basically project management on steroids, right? It is
Right.
project management with really high stakes, and you have to work really fast. It's really urgent. And so I had developed a lot of skills around creating really high quality work very fast with urgency and making really good decisions fast because we didn't want to make any bad decisions in those situations. And so all of that lends itself really well to the tech startup world, which also operates with a ton of urgency.
Yep.
And it also, I think, taught me a lot about, like, my emergency management time taught me a lot about communicating very clearly, because when you are operating quickly, very clear, direct communication is so critical.
Yeah.
And so, that's what really, I think, made it so that I could work easily in the SaaS environment. And the communication side in particular was what made it really easy for me to slot into customer success. Managing an upset customer is kind of like nothing compared to managing a really upset homeowner who also doesn't have a place to live.
Right.
So yeah, it felt really well aligned, and also, like, honestly, probably a little bit easier than maybe other customer success managers might have experienced, having come from that background.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head there because I remember. So I was working as a 911 dispatcher. I was part of a tactical emergency response team,
Mm,
for my 911 center. And when Sandy hit the New York City area, the state started activating these TERT teams across the state, and we ended up down in Long Island in Suffolk County,
oh wow.
and we were supporting all kinds of different aspects of the response, recovery, and so on. And I can remember being on information phone lines, helping out in that sense. And people just wanted their power turned back on. That's
Mm,
it. They
yeah,
just wanted their power back on. And feeling for those. And I had to switch my hat from being an emergency dispatcher to just being of customer service to the
mm,
people that were calling because all they wanted was to have their power turned back on. And when was that going to be? And realistically, that was my first, I would say, introduction to that kind of scale of a disaster. I'd been part of other local weather events when I was fire
mm.
chief. We had ice storms and flooding events, but this was large scale, multi agency. Here you go. This is how we do this. And I learned a ton from how that was put together and how that was managed.
That-
And I really took that with me as I went forward because of just the organization and the communication lines that had to be opened and um, just organizing all of these different because people were coming in and out. Yet,
right.
PERT teams coming in and out, response recovery teams coming in and out, FEMA getting involved and different things. Um, it was a big deal. Um, and it kind of changes your mindset, maybe recalibrates you a little bit,
Hmm.
to where, well, like you said, when you're working customer success, and even though you're managing, you can be managing problems. They're not quite as big as Hurricane Sandy hitting the New York City area.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And you can't say that, but you definitely feel that in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah. I think on the
Uh,
positive side, it really does, to your point, it helps grow you in so many ways. On the downside, there were times when I had to sort of remember to be empathetic, because I was sort of like, oh, this is your definition of problem and my definition of a problem are really, really, really different. Um,
right.
so that was a unique challenge I faced, but.
Um, did you, as you started working in the tech world in this space, and then ultimately with what you're doing now, um, did it change your idea of what's real risk versus what's perceived risk?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think being in that space, I also just want to clarify for everybody listening, I was not a first responder. I was a consultant. I had the much
Right.
cushier version, and it would be disingenuous for me to act like I was. So I'd like to flag that. With that being said, the types of emergencies I saw, et cetera, are a little different. But yeah, I think it really did. I think it is so different to know that missing a deadline means that somebody doesn't get money for their rebuilding their house is just so different than missing a deadline that makes like a marketing campaign a little bit late. And so I would say, for me, it's made it so that my sense of risk is a little bit maybe more extreme than others. I sort of think of like, is it going to kill me or is it going to lose all my money? If not, then like it's probably not as risky as like people think.
Yeah.
And I think all of that was really shaped by that early experience and seeing what I saw on the ground.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things, and this comes from being a jilted first responder at times, is, poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine.
Yeah.
And I've deployed that here and there, right or wrong.
Yeah.
So, but now I've talked about this on other podcasts of learning to be a little bit more apathetic, to listen and
Yeah.
then generate a response. And I think that goes a long way, is, take in all of the information, generate a response. And I think that's probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's a lot of what you do on the consulting side of things. You bring in all this data and all this information,
Mhm.
and then you generate a response of how to fix it, how to respond, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, back to the communication skills, both the listening and like how we communicate, our output, I think are both really critical and shift a bit, depending on which world you live in.
Yeah.
I'll also say, my husband's also an emergency manager, and a firefighter, and his perception of risk is really different than mine because
Mm.
as a first responder, he actually sees very different types of risks than I might on the disaster recovery side. While I'm looking at people losing their homes and thinking like, well, if that's the worst, these people are surviving. So, but he, is seeing other things that shape how he thinks about the safety of our home, the safety of our family, et cetera. And so
Right.
I still think there's a huge spectrum, but yeah, I tend to be be pretty open to risk, for better or for worse.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Switching gears a little bit now, and this is the part that really interested me because it kind of spoke to my own travels. Is, you get into working for different tech startups in customer success, product development, and now all of a sudden you look at, oh, I'm going to be the co-founder of a whole new company. How was that travel for you? What are the lessons you learned in there that made you even remotely available and ready to take on the role of a co-founder of a whole new startup company?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. This whole thing started actually with my own burnout, and I think probably a
Mm.
lot of people can relate to this. But I found really about this time last year, actually, I found myself in the middle of a medical emergency in New York City. Shout out to FDNY for responding to that. And I realized, actually responding twice, it was a bit of a day. It was an adventure. I realized at that time my body was really telling me, that I had to rein it in, had to figure some stuff out after being in some really fast-paced tech environments. And so that really started the thinking of like, well, what do I ultimately want for myself? It's not this, chilling in an emergency room in New York City is like not on my bucket list of situations.
Right.
And so it definitely caused me to pause and think a lot. And I initially decided to try to address the burnout itself, try to
Hmm.
put boundaries around my work, try to make sure I was taking care of myself, drinking the water, all those things. And that was useful, but it wasn't making the change I needed to. And at the same time as this was going on, I realized that I really didn't have like a great community to fall back on.
Mm.
Friends who had similar experiences had, for example, like their faith communities, their churches, etc. I didn't really have anything like that. I had friends, but I had friends sort of individually. I didn't have a group of people to turn to. And uh, that was a really interesting wake up call for me, being in my late 30s, and realizing like, oh, I don't really feel like I have this group that is invested in me in a way that they would want to help and that I'm invested in them. And as I was thinking through that, I also realized with a shock that I've been in the Syracuse area for 12 years. I'm originally from the Adirondack Mountains. So I know of Syracuse, I've known of Syracuse my whole life. It's the big city, you know.
You're right. Big city outside the big city.
Yeah, exactly. But I have been here for that long, and I still know very little about Syracuse. Remediating that very quickly, but a lot of my friends weren't here. I still have to drive with a GPS. I just realized like I haven't invested in myself meaningfully through sort of all of this experience combined. And I just decided like, I don't want that for myself. I want to have community. I've got a kid. I want my kid to grow up with this deep sense of community. I love it up here, but I want her to really, truly belong.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I started on this journey of like, what does this all mean? And on the way, met my co-founder who was talking about all of this. And I was like, this guy's talking about all of this. Maybe I should go talk to him. And this is how we sort of got together and started making this company. And so it was not my plan to leave and make a community building company at all. But in having these feelings and in sort of chasing them, I was able to sort of find what might be possible and jump to it.
That's great. And life is such a domino effect.
Yeah.
One thing just leads to another. I talk about too much ad nauseum about leaving civil service and public safety after almost 20 years. And because I didn't want to do it anymore. When I left 911, I could have cared less if I took another emergency call, if I dispatched another fire truck or a police car. Mm-hmm. I needed to do something else. And as I alluded to, I developed a small skill set. After getting my real estate license, I developed a small skill set in sales, which led to an opportunity to sell a public safety scheduling solution, which led to doing customer retention for that company, which led to getting hired to be a customer success manager at a next generation 911 company, and so on and so on and so on. I also co-founded a technology startup that was using AI for workforce management. But I've since, had the opportunity to work for a couple of different really great companies. And even the work that I'm doing now in school safety and facility safety is being the public safety SME for the company is just, something completely different. It's public safety, but it's not. Yeah. And it was just a chance to change gears and to do that kind of work. As you started looking at, all right, now you're going to find Optimistic Labs, and here we go. We're going to jump off this cliff and see, and you can probably, tell me if I'm wrong or not, jump off this cliff to see if we can build this kind of company and see if it's even remotely successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really interesting. So I met Seth Cohen, who is a former chief impact officer at Forbes. And he had been writing a lot about Upstate New York, which, as I noted, I love. Been writing a lot about community and also had like some interest in tech. And so there was just this great synergy, this great opportunity. And I really found him because somebody on LinkedIn that I know, I think, reposted one of his items. So this is how like random this was. They reposted an item. I thought that's interesting. Ended up shooting him a LinkedIn message at like 3 a.m. or some awful hour. And he answered right away, which was also kind of serendipitous, just because I'm like, oh, he's also awake at this time. This may really work. And we just got to talking. We ended up talking a few times digitally, ended up meeting up here in Syracuse, and really realized that we have really complementary skill sets, and also are really interested in some of the same things, sort of meeting the same human needs. And so we formed Optimistic Labs around the idea of human connection. As the world becomes more and more digital, we still think that investing in humans and investing in humans relating to one another and doing so well, hopefully, is a really, really, really important thing to do. And so, we conceived of Optimistic Labs, which is designed to help organizations build out their communities. And that could be tech organizations building out their user communities, nonprofit organizations building out donor communities or customer communities, you name it. It's kind of all over the place.
That's awesome. And one of the things I learned early on in my whole journey since civil service was if you're going to be in business, make sure you're in business. It's not B2B and B2G, B2C, it's B2H, business to humans.
Yeah. Yes.
And building that community and the same thing with the podcast, building a community around the podcast. Always have tried to do that to gain followers and support for this kind of podcast or this kind of framework for a podcast is to build community. And even in my real estate business, it was always how can we be the digital mayor of the community more than buy because I've heard way too many real estate agents buy or sell, buy or sell, buyers. Well, how about you be an active part of the community, and that way when people do want to buy or sell, they'll come talk to you. Did you find that building Optimistic Labs and this kind of consulting work was more difficult or easier than you thought it was going to be?
Oh, I think the answer is sort of both. That's a great question. It's easier in the sense that for two people who met on the internet, Seth and I drive amazingly well. We did a lot in the front end of building a company to define parameters, get on the same page, sort of treat risk the same way, et cetera. So we did a lot of quick work there. And so it's been really, really easy to have a co-founder. I had started like professional consulting businesses alone, solo entrepreneur type stuff. And so I was really nervous about that. The other thing that's been easier than I thought is attracting customers, frankly. I think Seth and I both have a big network, and I think it's a testament to our previous experience that people still want to work with us. And so that's been really, really cool and maybe a little bit unexpected for me. I really planned for a dry season. So that's been amazing. I think the harder part is things are moving and changing so much in the world, especially digitally. And so as a small team, we, like many other people, are managing that. And I think we're doing really well, but it does seem like every week we've got a new kind of workflow automation situation that we need to get on top of to make sure that we keep running smoothly, which we always also remind ourselves is an amazing problem to have, 6 months into this company, that we have too much and not too little. So.
Yeah, for sure. It's super interesting. And I was thinking about while you were telling that, I was thinking about a friend of mine, a mentor. He's big in sales enablement, go to market, but he's built his business and his consulting all around, and he's gone all over New York State, met with different, Chamber of Commerce and now he's part of a group that does the similar work. I almost think that because everything's so digital, because the world's moving so fast, that people are slowly or maybe quickly gravitating more to these community social fabric efforts than just being online, because it's exhausting, because things are moving so fast.
Yes.
And it's so loud and it's so noisy and so crowded that, creating an organization or business around community and having that interaction is a lot more attractive. At least that's, on my face value part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think that's the bet that Seth and I are making, but we're making it through our own experience. Like I said, my own craving for community, I think that is real and is really shared. I've met so many people who relate to that. And, our position is like, humans should be first. And if we're, allegedly going to get all this time back from AI, et cetera, then like, I hope we're using it to build together, to be together,
right,
build a better world together, like whatever that looks like. And so, it makes a ton of sense to me that it's both a problem and that it's a really solvable thing that we can do with just some elbow grease.
Yeah, no, that's great. So as you've been working around Central New York, Upstate New York, and what have you found is the biggest challenge, some of the biggest challenges to, this community building and the work that you do? Things maybe you have come across in a regular cadence, or maybe it was so profound that it was like, bam, this is a challenge. What are some of those things?
Yeah, I'm going to get a little bit woo-woo on you, but I do think that a lot of it is related to the attitude more than anything.
Hmm.
I do think, and again, I'm from upstate New York. I love upstate New York. I will be here for life. I do think we have a tendency to either downplay opportunities or even be negative about opportunities. I'll use Micron as the example. I'm not going to make any statements about it, but it's like people either hate it or are sort of like they don't think it's going to be as awesome as it's going to be,
Yeah.
and as it could be, and or there's like a small bubble of people who are like, this is awesome. But for the most part, like people aren't necessarily seeing it as the same big boom that people are talking about in the media.
Right.
And so there's like an interesting disconnect. And I use that as an example of where I think people tend to trend. Like people do tend to have a little bit of a cynical look on things. And I think a lot of what I think about related to this is like, we're just not very hopeful. And I think we could be. I think there's a lot going on. I think the people who are going to win the moment we're in, both here in New York and nationally, is like the people who take action
Yep.
in whatever direction they sort of need to or see fit. So that's like one area where I'm like, let's like pump up a little. Let's get excited. Like, let's believe, because I think if we all just like focused a bit, we can solve a lot of the problems that we have here in upstate New York. We have all of the resources to do it.
Yep.
And there's amazing talent that unfortunately keeps leaving because some of the problems we haven't solved. There is people like myself, like you, sort of generally love being here and see a lot of
Yeah.
benefits. I know we don't love the winters, but for the most part, like the weather is wonderful and the resources in terms of nature, et cetera, are all here. There's a lot
Yep.
going for us. And I think we really do just need to see it and seize the moment. And a lot of people focus on past failures. Like we tried that before and it didn't work. And I'm a big fan of like, well, let's iterate, let's try again. Let's do something a
Yeah.
little different. And I think it could work. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's great. So talk about Optimistic Labs. What are you guys doing day in and day out, and how do you, what's your goal to have that profound impact to the community?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we work with organizations and help them build out their communities. Community in a lot of ways, a community can have a lot of different meanings depending on the organization and their need. Sometimes it is as easy as, or as like light as uh, facilitating a board meeting, for example, where your community is this very specific tight board. Sometimes it is broader, like building out. One of the things we're working on that hopefully we'll be able to share more soon is, a larger center for civic innovation where larger groups can come together and try to solve big problems. And so there's a huge range on what a community could be and what the community might be doing. We use a process we call applied optimism, and essentially we believe that knowledge, purpose, and wonder are kind of the three things that every community has to have and be built around. And yeah, when we start at the strategic level, a lot of people treat community as a checkbox product. They say we need to have a community, and so we're going to spin up our Substack and we're going to invite people there, and they just treat it as like a thing to be done and expect it to grow and take over and be warm. We actually believe, you've got to start at the strategic level. You don't build a house by thinking about what wood you want to buy. You start by making a plan on like what you want this house to do and what you need it to have in it. And so we tend to take a really, really strategic lens and start there so that when communities are launched, they are meaningful, they're hitting their mark. And if they're not, there's a really tight way to iterate and learn quickly so that we can get to where we're going with it as soon as possible.
That's great. It's such a unique, to me, it's such a unique value proposition.
Yeah.
And unique point of view.
I think it is. It's resonating really well, which is nice. I think early on, people don't love optimists. Like, and we always sort of say like optimism, I think, isn't what people think it is. It's not just sort of always being positive and always being happy. Applied optimism is this idea that we take small and incredibly intentional steps in the right direction. We're finding that people really can relate to the mission, that people are excited about it, and that they can get past this sort of idea that we are just relentlessly positive humans, which we are not, and can really see where, oh yeah, like just having, one sort of hopeful idea and applying it can be meaningful. So yeah, a little bit of a different spin on consulting, but it's going well.
No, that's great. Let me ask you this, if somebody was looking to utilize your services and they were trying to build a community around something,
Mhm.
but they weren't really sure where to start, what's your best piece of advice to get them started?
My best piece of advice is to start with what you want to achieve. What do you want to get out of the community? What is its purpose? People can only align around some sort of shared sense of purpose or value. What's the mission? You have to start at that top level. And so I would try to answer that question for yourself, or try to get a hold of us. Would be happy to work you through it. Because again, starting a community isn't as simple as putting up a Substack. It's a way to start, but really diving into what you want to get out of it is the best way to inform how it should look and feel in practice. So start there. That's what I would do.
That's great. That's a great piece of advice, great piece of information. And so if people wanted to learn more about Optimistic Labs and the work that you do, and maybe the kind of organizations that you work with, can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah. We basically can work with any organization. One of the beauties of the business model itself, we tend to work with mission-driven orgs, nonprofits, and even tech companies, which are often mission-driven in a lot of ways. You can go to our website anytime as well and see what we're doing, as well as our Substack that we tend to share it there. Or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm actually don't remember my LinkedIn name. I think I'm under Liz Russell.
You are.
Is it Liz? I feel like I recently changed it.
Yeah.
And the LinkedIn URLs are interesting, but
Yes, they are.
yeah. But either way, feel free to find me and happy to share more about what we're working on. We are trying to build community in public, which means we're trying to share as much as possible on LinkedIn and in our Substack so that people can learn and so that we're sort of being genuine to the overall mission of improving human connection. I will say, I personally am the one holding the bag on some of that, and I'm behind. So more to come on that front. But yeah, that's a great place to stay in touch and learn as well. But if there's anything I can do for anybody, I'm always happy to try to chat and make time for it.
Awesome. Any big things on the horizon? I mean, that you might or might not be able to talk about?
I was going to say there's a lot of big things on the horizon.
Yeah.
What I'll say is, keep an eye on us, especially if you're an upstate New Yorker. There is one or two exciting things that we're hoping to share broadly and hoping to engage people on. One of my dreams for upstate New York is that we start to rival some of the other states in terms of our civic innovation, in terms of how we as people show up for our state and make this a great place to live. That's like my personal 5 or 10 years. That's what I want to be talking about. And so we're excited to launch some stuff that's related to that. And we'll be asking the public to get involved. And so look out for it if you have an interest in that area. Happy to chat more in depth. And yeah, hoping we can share a lot more soon.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great place to leave it.
Amazing. Well,
Awesome.
Jason, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time to come pull up a virtual chair to, at the kitchen table or pull up a chair to the kitchen table. It's exciting stuff. And I got to say, I always pick up on vibes on people, good or bad or indifferent. I always pick up on vibes, and your vibes and the work that you're doing is so intriguing to me that, I think more people should try to connect with you and look up the work that you're doing. Cause that's, that's very different. And this is, a different set of conversation that I've had in the past. I haven't come across too many people that, are trying to build organizations other than trying to build a small community around what they do. Such a unique prospect. And I appreciate you taking the time to describe that for me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I've got to say, I really love the notion of this podcast because my mom had always actually made us, I regretted it at the time, made us come home for dinner and made us talk during dinner. And so this idea of having conversations around a dinner table and keeping that as an important part of human connection, I just love. I really love it. So the feeling is quite mutual, Jason.
Thank you so much. I'd love to have you back again. I'm sure we could talk about, pick a topic, pick an event, pick a success of yours, and I'm sure we can spend another half hour talking about it. So I'd love to have you back again. Open door invite anytime you want to talk about something here at the kitchen table.
Sounds great.
So yeah, absolutely. So with that, we'll end it right there. Again, appreciate it. Episode 7 at the kitchen table. This is Liz Russell. I'm Jason Klink. Please take the time, if you're listening or watching, to share it with your community, and leave us any comments on what you think about the podcast. So until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have a great day.